Silence, okay. If we can move to number 3, which is the first action item, 3A, to approve the June 6th minutes of the meeting. Could I have a motion, please?
Second.
Thank you, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. And do we have someone joining us?
This is Shannon Hanna from Van Squig Associates.
Good morning, Shannon. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am just fabulous, thank you. I had a lovely coffee with Mary Scott this last week. It was so nice to see her.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So you'll be on the call for us this morning instead of Harry and Steve?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Brad, you or Ron?
Yeah. So today's agenda is basically a brainstorming session. Hello.
Okay, let's just introduce our new arrival.
R.J. Myers, Susky Consulting.
R.J. Myers with Susky Consulting, Shannon, and Ron Pierce is here. I apologize, I forgot to let you know that. And then we have Patty Johnson, Charlie Justice, our lovely gentleman from John Torga from Dunedin. I knew that. Myself and Brad.
Very kind of you to call me lovely. Thank you very much. I do. I appreciate that.
And staff is here as well. Okay, so Ron and Brad, who wants to go first?
Well, I think we should go ahead and start with the state legislative agenda. Today's meeting is really, I think, as Ron and RJ can say, very early on in the process, and so I just put together a list at your places of my own brainstorm of ideas for a state legislative agenda, and then there's a piece of paper that's the federal legislative agenda that we can talk through. But I'll let maybe Ron sort of talk through this and then the schedule. So just if there's anything on this that you think, if there's anything you would think we should add or delete, we can do that, no problem. And then this will come back to you for approval this fall.
So, Madam Chair, I'll just run through it really quick. Items A and B are relating to the tourist development bed tax. As you all recall, last year they made a change at the state level where dollars can be used for transportation-related projects out of the bed tax. This is clarifying language that would allow us to make sure that A can be used for vehicles and B, it can be used for operating expenses. I think that's an issue for us today on some projects we'd want to move forward with potentially.
Can
Is
we
that
talk?
correct?
Yeah.
Can we talk about those two before we move on, please?
Yes.
What is that what does that mean? To allow funding to be used for vehicles?
I think the way the language is written currently that came out of the legislature last year, we believe it would not allow it to be used for vehicles or specifically allowed to be used for operating expenses. So I don't know if you want to talk about the vehicle aspect of it.
Well, we had some conversation with Senator Brandis and other legislators and about our project, which would be an express service between Clearwater Beach and the airport. And the idea for that would be contracted out to a private provider. So the expenses that we would have on that would be operating expenses. Either that or we would buy vehicles with the funding and then give them to an operator to operate for us. The county attorney assigned to the Visit St. Pete Clearwater Tourist Development Council wrote a memo looking at the legislation and questioning, because the legislation does specifically use the word facilities, their opinion said that that's something different than a vehicle. That a vehicle is different than a facility. And then they also said, well, the legislation wasn't clear whether or not operations of any kind, and if we contracted the service out, it would be operations. So I think at least Senator Brandis told us that he thought it was fine, but I think some clarifying language would be helpful.
Commissioner Justice.
Well, I think a lot of clarification needs, because if they really intended for an expansion of use of the bed tax dollars, I mean, they tightened the noose around everything else.
Thank you.
To have the TDC approve a analysis project where the TDC has no funds to pay for that, so now it comes back to the commission to allow to pay for it. But also, how in the world, unless you just go out and buy a report, would you justify heads and beds or an expansion of tourism based on any of the transportation projects we've talked about? I mean, it's just, or an intersection or a culvert or no one's coming to Clearwater, Florida based on, hey, we got a new intersection improvement. You know, how do you make that justification as opposed to an event or a, stadium or something like that? You can, anyway, so if that's really what they wanted, then they need to clarify that so that we understand it clearly. And then it becomes a real choice for us. Right now, it's not really a choice. It's, in my humble opinion.
And I couldn't agree with what Commissioner Justice has said more, because as soon as I started the conversation last year when I was chair with the TDC Advisory Board. Keep in mind the words are advisory board. To get them, it took all year to get them to agree that they wanted a seat at the table, given that this statute opened up and how the money would be used. Fine. Well, now they only have a seat at the table, but the way the statute is written, they have to actually approve any project, anything before it even comes to the county commission. And let's keep in mind who these people are. They're all hoteliers for the most part. They all have skin in the game in terms of tourism in our county. And so if you're talking about what the needs are versus the wants, it's an incredibly, in my opinion, large amount of money that we pull in every year with the bed tax. And given the numbers of tourism folks that are coming into our county every year, last year it was 8 million, I want to say, Charlie? 8 million that came in. People. You can make certainly a strong argument that that's a burden on our infrastructure. Sewers, flushing the toilets, the whole ball of wax. And though it doesn't necessarily, to speak to Commissioner Justice's comment, that's not why people come here to flush their toilets and drive on the roads, but the reality is those needs need to be met, and the projections are somewhere around 30 million in 5 years. That's a huge number of people. And the way this is written, the statute opening it up, doesn't allow for a lot of flexibility in our county attorneys of the first roadblock, because they put up all kinds of red flags, and that was before we even started talking about vehicles. And operating expenses, so just, I would like the good senator to be aware of the challenges that he has put in front of us in terms of trying to be able to take advantage of what his good intent was. Right, did I say that right?
Absolutely. And I think when I was sitting next to a senator at a tourist or a beaches chamber breakfast the other day, and when this subject came up, he turned and said, sewers. So I think that's what his intention was. I don't know if it was buses. Or it may have been both. I don't know.
Maybe not.
John?
I don't know. I think it
Thank
was
you.
Uber.
Great
Uber
comments
vehicles.
from our county commissioners and Madam Chairperson. I like what you said about this whole subject. Fulmer Pinella sent the letter to the TDC, and the last item on there was a low-hanging fruit, and that was to increase the funding for the Jolly Trolley. And that would make, that's an easy one, and that's where they could join in this. But I appreciate the comments about what this might go for.
Thank you.
It's expanded a couple other areas that I'm still a little bit unclear about, and that is, number one, why wouldn't we do that as opposed to, you know, put that out for bid for a private to run that. If we really are, you know, trying to coordinate the movement within Pinellas from a full transit side, and/or you've expanded it more from transit for us being what? You call it something else.
Mobility.
Mobility, yeah.
So here
That's
we
the
have
new
mo-
buzzword,
That's correct.
according
So
to
we-
the feds.
Exactly, so now we got this new whole thing, mobility going. Whether, and I appreciate your comments here, and if we're just focusing just on transportation, well, then we call that mobility. And so how do we increase the mobility then, in the tourist areas that's good for the tourists from that fund? And, well, there is one, and we have a system, currently with PSTA that can move people from Clearwater Beach to the airport, but we just need to get it funded. Regardless of how we do that, whether it's an operating expense out of our operating fund to run our own buses, or whether we pay for that out of another area. So, I would like to make sure we keep our focus on the new buzzword, mobility, for this subject matter. And I appreciate you perhaps expanding it off to a few other things, because it does labor us up. But from my understanding of the legislation, and it's great to get this improved, because this is specific for transportation or transit, the words in here, which is then the new buzzword, mobility, and I understand that part of it. But a couple of things that were opened up. One is, are we going to be the operating expense? And that's a whole other subject now for today, I guess. But do we really need to put that out for bid, or can we run that ourselves?
And before you answer that, if I may, Commissioner Justice just corrected my numbers. That's why I rely on him, and I like it when he's sitting next to me. It's not 8 million people coming into our county, it's 16 million. Now just think about that in numbers. All of them that come here come on the roads. That's the only way to get here from Tampa International. It's a problem. Yes.
Madam Chair, may I add to that then? We have our own airport here. And beautiful airport, expanding airport, we're getting more and more flights into our own
Yep.
airport here. And those are the very people who are very comfortable in getting on public transportation and going into our beach areas or our tourist areas and staying and then riding things like the Jolly Trolley around, and or taking a taxi, because the cost of a rental is $200 a week minimum, and you may be could be paying up to $20 a day to park the darn thing, and you hardly ever need it. So just pay for a taxi or an Uber, or everybody's using Uber. So transportation to our own airport is I think for the county, for our county, is really, really important.
That would be good. You know, and I failed to mention, I'm glad you brought it up, the other option would be, that we proposed, was to increase the frequency of the Jolly Trolley service up the North Coastal route
Yes.
in our county. But that, again, would be operating expense, because we contract with the Jolly Trolley to run that.
Correct. So whether the word is
or we buy vehicles.
operating out of our fund or operating another fund, I appreciate the clarification. And I would, not that.
But again, as Commissioner Justice said, he brought up a good point. To write a report to say that people travel from wherever they come from to just ride the Jolly Trolley is probably hard to justify.
Sure.
But they certainly use it. I mean, when we do surveys of all of our trolleys, especially during spring break, over 50% are tourists, not living here.
And that's why I think if the legislature could give us clarification of, if that's what they, was it the ROI of heads and beds, or was it tourist impact, or tourist service, or however they want to define it, that way we can make the decision of how to best utilize it. But right now, it's so narrowly drawn that it's hard to say that there's true expansion. And everyone's already out in the community talking about everything they can do with all this money, that really is not as much as they think it is. But
And before I get to you, Patty, do you know what the motive was to put that TDC has to pay for an analysis?
that was one of the compromises that was made. There was a lot of pushback from local government, there was a lot of pushback from tourism organizations across the state. So they were trying to ensure that if you're gonna move forward with dollars that were gonna be used outside of the current realm of tourist development, current programs and needs that could be funded under statute, they wanted to ensure that, kind of to Commissioner Justice's point, that you were gonna come up with things, projects you were going to fund that could relate back to tourism directly. But to your point, you're paying for kind of whatever that analysis is gonna look like. You're gonna be able to kind of point to heads and beds if you had to.
And they
But-
probably didn't realize that the TDC doesn't have a operation, I mean, they probably didn't understand the operation function, that they didn't have any money to
Well,
pay for a study.
Not only that, but are I not correct that the expansion only applies to the high impact counties? So what difference does it make if all the smaller ones we're pushing back?
Actually, I
Doesn't
don't think
apply to
so.
them anyway.
It doesn't, it's not just high, I think it applies to anybody.
Yeah.
Because
Oh.
the reason Senator Brandis did this is because when he was chairman of the Transportation Economic Development Appropriations Committee, you saw all these projects that were coming from local governments looking for funding. And by the way, when he mentioned sewers, by the way, and stormwater, he wasn't lying. He said, look, if all these people are looking for these local projects, why not take local dollars that are being collected today from a tourist development standpoint, allow those local governments to spend them in their local community on projects that are improving their community. That was really why he kind of wanted to make this change. Madam Chair, my only comment is number one, I would caution us opening this up completely. This is a huge political football last year. I think both of you would, kind of relate as former legislators. They're not going to want to have this fight again. So like if we're saying, if we want to go back and say, hey, we want to look at potentially rewriting sections of what we did last year, I think we can have a conversation about it and see if there's interest. I'm not sure how much interest there would be now would they be open to maybe doing some clarifying? That's not maybe changing the intent, but clarifying what those dollars could be spent
That's
on.
really all we're asking for.
I think initially what we can do is we have a meeting with Senator Brandis later this month. So as we talked about yesterday, this is more of not all of this is going to end up on our agenda. This is more from a discussion standpoint. Is discuss all of this today, kind of see what our interests are. Meet with Senator Brandis and a couple of the members of the delegation between now and our next meeting. Come back at our next meeting, because there may be an opportunity to get this clarified, not having to do something in Tallahassee. We could possibly work with staff in Tallahassee to say, okay, what was the legislative intent? Do we believe the legislative intent would be allowed for vehicles and operating expenses? And if so, if that is the case, we've got a bunch of attorneys across the state working with cities and counties right now that are interpreting that much differently.
Exactly.
How can we make sure that everybody's on the same page?
Bingo. I think you nailed it right on the head. Commissioner Johnson.
I just wanted to bring up one thing that I keep seeing. We keep talking about Tampa to Clearwater, Tampa to Clearwater. And it was brought up to me at a meeting I was late for on Saturday that you did very well and everyone was very happy. Thank you. We also want to go to the Don Cesar, and we want to go to see the Salvador Dali, and somehow this message is getting lost that our BRT is great and we need to get from Clearwater to other places than just Clearwater Beach. And I don't know how to.
Well, that's your
To
local
include
folks that
that.
have, the local folks have that authority to take care of that issue.
In Tallahassee, they know about the Dolly.
I would like to think they do. It's world renowned.
What I'm trying to say is, if there's some way that we can say to Clearwater and because the message is getting lost somehow, that we can get people.
Well, yeah, the attorneys
The
have
trolleys,
said,
whatever. When I was in Boston, we trolleyed everywhere. I mean, everywhere.
I love Boston.
Huh?
I love Boston.
I loved it too, Janet, but what I'm saying is, when I think about the experience that I would love to have here, you love Boston, I want to have that same experience. I think we can do that. I'm
Absolutely.
excited.
It's a moment that we want to take advantage of in terms of everything. So, point well taken, we're really talking about moving tourism around not only the region, but throughout Pinellas County once they get here. So,
Madam Chair, may I? We have, Florida League of Cities has the meeting on the 14th of September, first legislative meeting on transportation with them. Before we end this, is there anything that I need? I don't want to bring this up as a major issue if we're going to try to take care of this locally, because I'm, of course, concerned about all of Florida, but I'm really concerned about.
I don't think it would,
Pinellas, frankly.
I don't think it would hurt for you to bring up that, are they hearing the same thing, that are some of the city attorneys interpreting how these dollars can be spent differently than what maybe the legislative intent was, and if so, would there be need for, we don't need necessarily, we don't need them to lead the charge, but I think it would be helpful to, if you're hearing the same thing, some of the counties are hearing from their attorneys.
yeah, because you bring it up at the league, and I'll be happy to bring it up at the FAC conference later this month.
That's perfect timing.
Because Nancy Dieter is on the policy committee, same as me, and she had a real angst about this issue last year, and didn't really want to talk about it until she found out what the legislature actually was going to do, and now that they have, I think it'll be a very robust discussion, so we can bring back more information next month.
And Chair.
Okay, good, yeah.
And at the very same meeting he's talking about, I'm on finance and legislative.
Okay.
So if you're gonna bring that up, do you want it brought up there?
It would, I think, help just to find out if the other counties and cities are having the
I think if
same
you
sort of
just ask
challenges.
the same question again, is based upon, what was done last year with the tourist development dollars, are some of the city attorneys, are they having clarifying issues on how the dollars can and can't be spent on certain projects?
Ask there, and I'll ask on the policy committee at that. All right, can we move to number B
Madam
then?
Chair, may I?
Or
Yes,
C.
please. Well, we have to
I know
keep
one
moving.
more
because
time
is
in for Commissioner Justice. For our TDC here, the letter came from an organization which is Forward Pinellas. We all love Forward Pinellas. But should we back that up with a letter from should we also back it up with a letter from PSTA? Because we're mobility here, and we're the ones telling the hoteliers that we're trying to move people around, help them move people around. So is Forward Pinellas, but we're the ones that actually have the assets to do it.
Well, I think the letter was written by Forward Pinellas because it was Whit Blanton
That did the
and Forward
presentation.
Pinellas that did the presentation to the Tourist Development Council
Understand.
that
Yeah,
I attended, and
sure. So,
I mean, I thought that the TDC was well aware that it was
exactly.
related to investing in public transportation, tourist-oriented public transportation.
So, Madam Chair and Commissioner Justice, would it be to our advantage for us to step into the TDC from PSTA standpoint, just verifying that and verifying what we like to do?
I think it's a little
Okay.
premature. My personal
Okay,
preference. What
okay.
do you think?
It might be early in the process, but on the other hand, I don't think there's any harm in making the TDC aware that there's other organizations that share that interest that Ford did, so.
And there's two elements here for me. One is a Jolly Trolley, and the other one is the communication from our airport here in Pinellas, to our tourist areas, to Dunedin, to
Donsey
Clearwater,
Sar.
to Donsey, all of it. And we're just getting so many people. We have honor flight again this weekend, and on last Tuesday, we had to get the people in there an hour early. That means we had 95-year-old guys up at 3 in the morning. I mean, standing at our airport at 3 in the morning because there were so many flights going out. And coming in at night, we had to reorganize everything because we had flights coming in from everywhere. So
Trust me, we hear about it almost every meeting.
I know, and I
In a
think
negative way?
Well, it's we don't need to digress on that
Sorry.
at the moment, because
Yep.
we have a
Thank you.
pretty big
Madam,
robust agenda.
Madam Chair, and I can get to the next couple pretty quick. C and D are relating to transportation disadvantage. This is something that's been a priority of PSTA since we've been involved with the organization.
Right.
It will continue to be. Last year, the proviso list on how the dollars are being spent for transportation disadvantage. So, number one, we want to make sure that our, the late shift funding is included. Number one. Number two, whatever formula they continue to develop and is put out there, make sure that we're being held harmless, and more importantly, should be able to get our fair share, which should be more dollars. Then the last one, D here, relating to Medicaid brokerage services. We actually have a meeting with Senator Brandes later this month to have a conversation around that and around some ideas he has relating to transportation disadvantage. So I think it needs to be on the agenda, and it should be something that we continue to push for.
Good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Of course, you knew TD. I have to tell you that earlier you brought up that the smaller counties are trying to disperse money in their area, their way. And this has been an ongoing problem. Alan knows that we have counties that are getting huge amounts of TD money to transport minimal persons, and we're transporting as many or more than Broward County, Dade County, and those, Duval County is one of the, ones that just sucks up those TD dollars. And trying to get them here where we need them has been a chore, always. Alan has certainly helped push us in where we need to go. We need to continue to go, because those dollars could leave us just as fast as they came.
Good point. Thank you. Number 7?
E, Clearwater Beach
F.
Causeway Busway construction, as you remember, we had PD&E dollars. There's currently in the process being worked on with DOT. It looks like the project's going to cost between $9 and $12 million. So we're working with DOT to see if we can get that into the work plan. F, increased FDOT grants urban corridor funding to District 7. It's a recurring pot of money. It's not a lot of dollars that can be spent on operations. A, we want to make sure that, I think there's been some talk about possibly doing away with that pot of money. Is A, ensuring those dollars are still there, then B, if there's any way to increase dollars. It's something we could use from a recurring standpoint. We could definitely use from an operation standpoint. And then G, we're trying to work on an innovation project. We're not sure what that would look like yet. I'm not sure if it's autonomous vehicles. It could be something else.
When you say we're not sure what that looks like yet, what does that mean? You
we've-
and Senator Brandes?
No, we've been also working with staff as well.
Well,
So-
Brad, what is that? That doesn't make me feel very good, because we've been talking about that.
We have a number of ideas of what to do, what we'd like to do. But we've had a lot of ideas for the last, I think, 3 years. And for the last 3 years, we have gone in with a beautiful, graphically designed effort. We've gotten the PSTA board to approve of it and everything. We go to Senator Brandes and we say, look at this awesome idea. It's got autonomous, it's Uber, whatever. And he says, that looks really interesting, but I have this other idea. I met this guy out in Silicon Valley, and then, and he presents a completely different thing. So Ron and I talked, let's just try something different. Let's, before we pitch all of our ideas, let's go and ask him. Let's just talk to him.
Wait, hold on just
Let's just
one
talk to
minute.
him and get
I
his
have-
ideas on the table first.
Call order.
That's what we're suggesting.
Where's my gavel? Brad, are you listening to yourself? I mean, we can't just keep on, we've been talking about this autonomous vehicle pilot project, Cassandra.
I'm listening. I'm here.
Originally, it was gonna launch last May. Then it went, and I tell people how exciting it is and how this is the future and blah, blah, blah. Then it went from May, now it's November. And now I'm hearing you say, maybe not so much. So are we or are we not working on a pilot project?
We are. We're working really hard on a
the autonomous
November
vehicle
autonomous
from
vehicle.
the Vinoy to the Dali? Yes?
Yes. Yes.
And this would be above and beyond that.
This would be
correct?
above and beyond.
So
This
that's
is
not,
the-
that's not
this is
impacting
beyond
that project at all. This would be either enhancing a project, that project, or another project, or coming up with a new project, which we'd present at our next meeting.
So I have a message for Senator Brandis, and if you would like to deliver it, that would be great, or I'm happy to deliver it myself. Regardless of what project he's got his eyes on today, I can guarantee you that in 5 months, there's gonna be a different one, you know
Yes,
why?
I'm sure.
Because that's how fast technology is moving right now. It is impossible to say today what the public transportation world is gonna look like 5 or 10 years from now. With that said, we have to live in the world of reality. And the reality is, our people are suffering, our disadvantaged are suffering. They can't get back and forth to work. So, for the good of our citizens, can we please not make it all about Senator Brandis and what he wants, but what's in the best interest of our citizens?
Yes, ma'am.
And in my mind, Ron, the key is whatever we zero in on, let's be nimble about it, and let's keep it flexible to the point where we can adjust to the next new shiny thing that Senator Brandis sees coming down the road, so we can take advantage of that too. But if we don't change our way of thinking about how we move forward, we're gonna be stuck. There's gonna be a new shiny thing every 5 months or 6. And I have lots of examples of that exact thing.
We hear you, and I think the intent there was, to Brad's point, is the last couple of
Yeah.
years, we've had projects, we've approved them, we go to our delegation, and unfortunately, we haven't gotten as much support from the delegation as we would hope. I think what we're trying to do is come up with a project that is something that we're working on, that's kind of in the queue somewhere, that hopefully fits into a priority of somewhere else, of somebody else in the delegation, that we can try to get dollars. And we keep mentioning Senator Brandis because of A, he's Mr. Innovation, and then number 2 is, you know, obviously, he's one of the senior members of the delegation that will be in a position, I think, to potentially get funding out of Tallahassee over the next 2 years under Senator Galvano. And we shouldn't lose sight of the fact as well, I think another important person in this discussion will be Senator Roussan.
I was just gonna say that. I spoke to him
He'll be-
yesterday, and he's all on board to help us.
And he's asked Senator Galvano for, you know, last year I think he was Vice Chair of Transportation, and I think he was Vice Chair of Transportation Economic Development Appropriations. I think he's gonna ask for both of those
He already has.
chairmanships again, so if he ends up as vice chair in those 2 committees, there may be an opportunity there, again, depending on what our issue is. So I promise you, we'll bring back a project. I think, you know, number 1, it's not just all about members of our delegation, but we just want to make sure as we're kind of thinking ahead, there at least, because the last couple of years, Brad's right, you all have approved different things. We've gone to Tallahassee and they've put it in and so on, but I mean, as RJ will tell you, it just wasn't a priority. And so we want to make sure we come up with something that can be seen as a priority that we can move forward on.
Well, tell him I am Mrs. Innovation. And I am also a senior member of the county commission.
Yes, ma'am.
Like Charlie loves to remind me. I saw you in.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
As a junior member of the but I mean, I see your point, but on the other hand, if Senator Brandis, I mean, if he's still in a position of that kind of power next year, then one of those ideas that, you know, you go up with the idea and he says, no, what about this? Are any of those what about this things that work for us? And that
That's
he's
the-
willing to
Maybe,
fight for and
yeah,
get money,
maybe.
and we can plug those in somewhere, and he's willing to fund them, and he's not willing to really work to fund the others. Let's take the money where we can get it, if it works. I mean, I don't want to do something that's completely ridiculous to what we're trying to accomplish here, but
And that's the
That's the
entire
word
point,
nimble.
and that's the entire point, I think, of this conversation, is finding something that makes sense from a PSTA standpoint.
Yeah. Okay, quickly, you had something else?
Yes, if I may, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
As a full supporter of our county commission and commissioners and all those involved, of course, the last time I spoke with Senator Brandis was at least 2 months ago, and I didn't go to him with anything. But is that something that perhaps we should start working on to let him know that there's folks that are supporting our county commission and that our commissioners or mayors or vice mayors in other locations, but we need to know what that is. if I call them up and start talking about transportation again, we go ooh, ah, about the Mercedes system, you know, that's a really cool system, and I can describe all that with you, and on and on. What did I do? I didn't do anything to help us here. So the last time I talked with him, I asked him what, you know, we were talking about some of the important things he was gonna press for next year. Maybe we need to do some of that data mining, or even more aggressive than that.
How about
Maybe-
you give us homework?
Yeah.
Excuse me for interrupting you.
Thank you.
Next time we meet, you can assign us some homework, and then we can all be on the same page, speaking the same message.
Okay. And again, I'll know a lot more later this month, so at our next meeting, we'll be able to do that, so.
Thank you. Let's-
You're
let's-
welcome.
let's
Patty,
do that.
quickly, did you
No,
have-
I'm good, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah,
Madam Chair, the last three are relating to T-BARTA. Number one is, as you all know, PSTA is very involved with T-BARTA at this point from an operations standpoint. It looks like the number, T-BARTA had an ask last year of $1 million from the legislature that Senator Galvano was very helpful in getting done. It looks like the number this year would be asking for another 1.5 million. Keyword there is recurring. So I think we'd work with T-BARTA on trying to get either recurring or non-recurring. We'll take whatever we can get from the legislature. Again, Senator Galvano would be very involved in that discussion. Number two, from T-BARTA's perspective, is necessary funding for the 41-mile regional premium transit project. As you all know, $5 million was last year in the budget. They would have to put additional dollars in the budget to move forward with the project, which I think by the end of the year, I think we'll know kind of where we stand. DOT is still making some changes with regards to, is it dedicated lanes, is it managed lanes, how many stops, or some other things are kind of going through that discussion. We'll let DOT make those decisions. Once those decisions are made, let's make sure that DOT funds it. Then the last is T-BARTA would like to have some clarifying language to ensure that last year, 2 years ago when they made the change for the legislation for T-BARTA, the mayors have to attend. They couldn't send a designee. They want to be able to change where you know, either the mayor could send, either can appoint alternates, or they could potentially be exempt from impacting a quorum requirement if needed. So, so that's something that, and I think there may be some additional things you may would know better than I, Madam Chair, that may come out of those discussions.
There are a couple, and they're very small, but it speaks to, while the intent is very honorable, the reality of trying to implement all the different committees and meetings and have a physical presence. It's very difficult because of the largesse of our region. So if there was a way for members to be able to dial in, be able to join the discussion, and though we can't take votes there, we can at least have the ability to make recommendations back to the full board, that'd be very helpful.
The good news is I would not see a separate bill for that. That could be easily
It's just a
included
tweak.
in one of the transportation packages.
Yeah, just a little amendment would clarify all of that. All right, so are we
Madam Chair,
good?
can I get a clarification?
Uh-huh.
The 5 million, that's the 5 million that TOD, our 7 had in their budget.
Correct.
It's just holding the spot currently.
That's correct, and that
Sorry.
$5 million was allocated in this fiscal
Yes,
year.
yes.
It'd be new dollars moving forward for the project.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep, good. Anything further on the state funding? Are you
No.
ready, Shannon? Are you still with us?
I'm still here.
I apologize, it took us so long to get to you, but these were important discussions that we needed to have. So would you like to start off with kind of a summary of where we are at the, I know everything's all tied up in Judge Kavanaugh.
Well, I'll start with saying Congress at least the House just came back in yesterday. The Senate took 2 short breaks in August, one at the beginning, and then they took off right before Labor Day. So they had a much more abbreviated summer recess. But now we're sort of back into the swing of things with the fiscal year ending at the end of September on September 30th. So appropriations is really sort of where the focus is, at least in the transportation world, unlike folks who are on the Judiciary Committee in the Senate are not focused on that per se. But where we are is the first appropriations bill is expected to be signed into law sometime either by the end of this week or the beginning of next week. The House is expected to take it up later this week and then kick it to the Senate, and that is the first sort of minibus, which did not include transportation, but included energy and water, Ledge Branch, Veterans Affairs, things like that. That's going to be the first one to leave. On the transportation appropriations front, the House and the Senate subcommittee chairs are actually meeting this week to talk about sort of what are now considered to be member issues. Staff was working over the August break to try to negotiate out where their differences were. One thing to sort of note, the House only passed the transportation bill out of committee. It did not actually ever go to the House floor. The Senate, however, did pass the transportation bill, the transportation appropriations bill for FY19 in a larger package that was sort of considered the second minibus to pass. So they're negotiating between a House committee passed bill and a Senate, full Senate passed bill. One of the biggest issues in passing bills out of the House broadly has been the inclusion of more controversial riders, is what they're called, so legislative provisions, generally authorizing provisions that are usually pretty controversial. The Senate Chairman Richard Shelby from Alabama actually put a prohibition of controversial riders on all of the bills. So you'll see that most of the appropriations bills that have already left the Senate, in fact, I think the Senate has finished all 12 off the floor, were relatively non-controversial because of that. So working those issues out with the House is going to be interesting from a broader perspective. But what's expected to happen now is that there will be some bills that will make it out and onto the president's desk by that September 30th date. But most are expecting that it will not cover funding for the entire federal government. So we will still need a continuing resolution. What I'm hearing is that the continuing resolution will likely be somewhere between mid-November or beginning of December, so definitely past the election date. So whether or not transportation will be one of those bills that passes between September 30th, unclear yet, but it looks like they've at least made some progress. I think one of the big issues that they're trying to work out is the funding levels were just significant enough between the House and the Senate, and they're trying to figure out what could the House be willing to take in terms of funding levels. What we're hearing is that it will definitely be lower than the Senate passed levels, but whether or not they'll come above the House number is unclear at this point for several things. The Senate also included some language that would not allow the administration to move forward with language that they put out, that the FTA put out in a Dear Colleague letter to all transit agencies on the Capital Investment Grants Program regarding local match. So I know that language was put in there by Senator Jack Reed from Rhode Island, who's the ranking member on the subcommittee, and he's already been saying openly that language he is really fighting to keep in a final bill, which would sort of make that letter and the instructions in that letter void.
So Shannon, can you stop right there for a moment and tell us what is the number of the funding levels in the Senate?
In the Senate bill, I've got that in front of me, give me 1 second. For FTA, the funding levels were a total of $13.5 billion. And for build grants, it'd be $1 billion. For capital investment grants, They gave about 2.5 billion, which is still a little less than what they had given, about 90 million less than what they gave in the FY18 bill, but still sort of in that range. But to give it some context, 1.5 billion above the president's request for that program.
But what is the House? The House is a lot less.
The House number is for capital investment grants is 2.6, so they were a little higher on capital investment grants. When I say the numbers were lower on a lot of other programs, the numbers were significantly lower in the House. For example, build grants was put in place. The House bill only gave them $750 million, whereas the Senate gave $1 billion. Last year's number was $1.5 billion. So there's sort of a lot of programs that were like that. Capital investment grants is well within that same range. I don't expect that the number is significant enough to be held up. My guess is that on capital investment grants, it's going to be some of those language writers that were included in the Senate bill that were very strong on the administration moving these projects forward. I do want to sort of wave the caution flag. I know everything's been going really well so far with the PSTA project, but do keep in mind that other projects, I mean, this program really has been grinding to a slow roll. The administration really just does not like this program and is making it very clear that they are going to do as few projects as they can possibly do. So it is very important that PSTA continue to do what we've been doing, which is really getting bipartisan support, which we have done a really good job of. I think that FTA is very positive about the PSTA project. I think the resistance to this program really is higher than the FTA. It's more rooted in DOT. And that's where projects have seemed to find some resistance in general. But I think so far PSTA is in a good spot. But I just kind of wanted to sort of give you the scope that it's not necessarily all sunny with this program. So we've got to just make sure we keep on doing what we're doing, essentially.
With that said, do you have dates for us about when you would like us to come back and visit with our quote-unquote friends?
Let me talk to Harry and Steve about that. I have some ideas for them, but let me bat that around and we'll get back with you guys.
Sooner rather than later, because our calendars tend to get really filled up.
Yes, ma'am, we will do so.
Yeah.
And one more thing I wanted to add is that there has been, I know we've all been watching closely the nomination for the FTA administrator, Selma Drake. That nomination has not moved, and there's really no indication that it will move. My suspicion is that this is not a nomination that the administration is pushing hard on the majority leader to move.
But that's okay because we like the person that's the interim, right, Brad? She likes us.
Yes, she does. But I just wanted to sort of let you know, and then I know there's also, Democratic holds on that nomination as well due to what's going on with the capital investment grants program.
Oh.
So just wanted to let you know I don't know that's anything that I could see moving in the foreseeable future, because I just don't know that it's a priority for the administration.
Okay, Brad?
There is one other thing, and Shannon, I don't know, I apologize if I didn't send it to you. I don't know if you have a copy of our draft, our brainstorm list of priorities that the PSTA board might ultimately approve for a federal agenda. But like you said, number one on our suggested list is not only that the capital investment grant funding be in place, but to do whatever we can to push it along, to get the administration to actually award the funding out to projects, which has now become a new issue, which has never been an issue before. But I did want to highlight, there's another item on our list that I know Harry is aware of. I don't know if you are, Shannon. Item D on our list here. Related to our strong desire to have an autonomous vehicle pilot on November 1st in St. Petersburg. We learned last week that there is a hold on all autonomous vehicle pilot projects put on by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, that they are not approving any of them until, apparently, Cassandra can correct me, but what Cassandra told me that she heard was that there's a new director of that administration, and until that person gets up to speed on modern autonomous technology, they're just not going to approving anybody. Gainesville, Florida had a proposed pilot that was supposed to start on August 21st, like a week and a half ago, and they've been put on hold indefinitely by this NHTSA permit. You know, we still got some time, and hopefully there'll be some kind of movement at NHTSA where they start approving or start looking at the different projects to approve them between now and November 1st.
So with that said, Ron, can you talk to Senator Brad about visiting with this gentleman or lady?
We talked about getting Senator Brandis involved, and Harry suggested let's hold off on that.
Well.
But I don't know if Shannon, you have any new intel on that issue.
I don't have any new intel, but I will just say I've been tracking the autonomous vehicle issues for a while, and one of the major issues that NHTSA, I think, is struggling with is, and frankly the Congress is struggling with, is how to sort of regulate without stifling this industry and allowing pilots to move on, but how to give some sort of regulatory framework around what these pilots should, give enough flexibility for these pilots to actually be pilots and test some things, but also sort of have some guardrails up. I know that there have been some cities and states that have been wildly supportive and want to be as open as possible to being a part of these pilots. And then there's cities and states that are frankly on the very other side of that, who say, look, we are still very uncomfortable with this technology. We want it to be regulated. We're worried about, lots of safety issues. Unclear whether or not the manufacturers of this technology and manufacturers of these vehicles should have the sort of leeway they should, and then how do you sort of make those two sort of congruent and give some regulatory framework that allows localities to have that flexibility. I also think the issue with the accident in Phoenix, or Tempe rather, to where someone was killed by an autonomous vehicle, I think that's sort of, put some, I think that sort of scared some regulators here in Washington a little bit. So stay tuned. I don't have anything new, but none of that was surprising when I heard it. In terms of NHTSA sort of slow walking right now. I think the other thing is Congress is working out, trying to pass, the House has passed an autonomous vehicles bill. The Senate has one that they are desperately trying to get passed. It's a bipartisan bill. Those two bills are very different in their approaches. And, many in the industries have said that there's some pros and cons to both of those. But I think that is also part of what is driving NHTSA's slow walk, is to see what is likely to come out of Congress.
Okay, it just sounds like a lot of delay. And since I'm not aware of any kind of NHTSA police officers, I was wondering if maybe they wouldn't even notice. We just went ahead and did it, but I heard that our vehicle provider is the group that would get in trouble. We wouldn't get in trouble. So, I don't know. Anyway.
Cassandra wanted to.
Well, let us know how else we can be helpful. I know you guys, I think Harry was working on trying to set up a call with NHTSA.
Yeah.
But if there's anything else we can do to help with that or any of these other issues, please let us know.
Okay.
Do we need to talk about the last one?
The last item on our agenda, on our federal agenda, Shannon, is I put on here was to oppose the FTA's rule making proposals regarding the risk assessment requirements, but I guess it also was related to the match issues that you mentioned. And we did have a call earlier that with the Senate staff talking about our concerns about it, but and you mentioned that I guess Senator Reid and maybe there's other efforts to try to make all those proposed changes not happen.
Correct.
Yeah. So that we would be, I guess, supportive of that. Not that those are really the highest priority, because I think we could handle it even if they were approved. Our project would still shine. So, but it's on there. Thank you.
Anything else, Shannon?
I don't think so.
Okay. Brad?
I think that's it. Is there anything else,
For the good of the order?
on either the state or federal priorities?
Ron?
We'll get a list of trips and visits to both.
And that's what I was going to say, just 30 seconds, Madam Chair, to make sure we're on the same page. So the plan would be is for us to come back at our October board meeting, approve the agenda, have it presented to the full board at the end of October for full approval, which lines up perfectly because November 6th is the election, allows us to be able to roll out the agenda to our delegation and other key members in November. There may be a committee week in December, 2 weeks in January, 3 in February. Session starts in March this year, back to kind of the traditional schedule. I'd recommend, we don't have the dates yet, but probably doing a trip in January, maybe the second committee week in January, and then also doing a trip in March. I'm hoping to have a schedule between now and maybe our next meeting. So once we have that agenda, maybe we can maybe propose a few dates that we can start targeting to get on everybody's schedule.
That would be good. Is that good with you, Brad?
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone? Questions, concerns, thoughts? Look at that, we're right on time.
All right.
Then for the good of the order, we are adjourned. If you're on the executive committee, we'll meet at 10:15. Otherwise, have a great day. See you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Huh?
Thank you.
Good job.
Good, busy, but good. So,
Oh, thank you.
at least we're through the primary. That's good.
What you guys need?
We bounced around.